Oh man,
Yo,
it's time.
it
Oh,
is.
Hello, yo. Hi. Okay, first of all, again, it's always the most important thing. How are you guys feeling? How you feeling, Maury?
I'm
You
feeling
looking
great, man. Today was my last day of
good?
class. We're done. I'm ready. I'm excited, man.
Oh, a celebration time.
spirit.
Yes, sir.
Hold on the display. Anyways, Maury, how you feeling?
I'm feeling really good. Practice has been going really well with everything, and I've been very excited for this podcast episode. So
Yeah,
ready to get
I'm
into
I'm
it.
feeling the same, and I will introduce him in just a moment. But I first have to say, welcome everyone to Meraki's Game Stays episode 4. It's already been a month. We're on 4 episodes
Dude,
now,
mind
and
blown.
today, from our previous weeks, we've been talking about the relations between BMG with Brawlhalla and the community. We kind of want to get away from talking about Brawlhalla because it's basically just gonna be like a hate fest, whatever. Even though we still love the game, of course. However, we do want to get some industry insights into just everything in general. It's a world that none of us, like basically none of us, are even a part of. We know nothing about, and so today we've brought on a special guest by the name of Neil. Welcome, sir. How are you?
Good. I'm good. I'm super happy to be here. Super glad to meet y'all. Obviously, I know D for a long time, but yeah, no, I'm doing really well, and I'm stoked to be here and stoked to chop it up and just get into it and tear it up and share whatever insight I can with y'all.
Thank you for coming,
Awesome.
man.
Yeah, of
And I
course.
believe you know what, Maury. This is your guy. I think you should start it
It's gonna
off.
get it's gonna
Yeah.
get real dicey real fast.
Yeah, like you said, we've been friends for quite a long time. We grew up together. We went to high school together, played sports together. You know, the whole shebang. We've been with each other for through our ups and downs, everything, right? And this man, he's on his up, man. He's every time I talk to him, he's just going up, up, up. Everything he's doing is amazing, right? He's just got some of the best work. It's so cool. Um, and with that, like kind of let us know what you got going on, Neil. Like
Yeah.
who are
But
you and like what insight do you have for us? Like what do you do?
cool. Yeah. So I'll try to maybe start at the beginning, but I'll probably try and breeze through some of that stuff because I don't know that anyone cares. But my name's Neil Edwards. I'm a game designer, training and by trade. So I work in the video game industry. I've worked in the video game industry for the last, I guess 8 or 9 years. Whenever
Sheesh.
2013. I started in October 2013. Um, so yeah, I grew up in a tiny little farming town, D. Um, I had a lot of creative interests as a kid, and I didn't know what the hell to do with that. I like to write, like to build things, like to do all kinds of shit. I didn't really know that it was like design at the time. I didn't really know what that kind of was, and so I wasn't even necessarily a big, huge gamer as a kid. I mean, I played a good amount of games, but as I got a little bit older, I thought, hey, maybe video games will be a way where I can kind of get to try out all my creative interests and not necessarily be limited by the realities of like, hey, if I want to design and build a building, I don't have to be an architect and actually build it and fight gravity, right? So it's like, I just thought, hey, maybe I'll get to do a little bit of all these things because I was interested in so many creative kind of things, and so. I had no idea what that meant at that time, but I was like, yeah, I'm gonna go be a game designer. Um, and so I wanted to get in the industry, but I had no clue. Like, it's so like, I mean, it's like Cinco was saying, it's like a black box, right? It's like this giant like iron curtain, and you're like, I don't fucking know how to achieve that, and or I don't know anything about it. And so initially, I was like, okay, I'll go and get a computer science degree. I'll go get a
Mm,
programming degree because like every OG game designer, they were all just programmers that also happened to design games. That's how the
Yep.
game industry got started because they
okay.
were all just fucking coders that made really shitty art, but it worked at the time, right? And so I was like, I'll go get a computer science degree. So I went to Oakland University. I was a computer science major for 2 weeks. I dropped that and was like, I don't matter how like I was always really academically successful, but my most advanced computer class in high school was like copy these formulas from this Excel workbook into like
Right.
this data sheet. And so like the most basic prerequisite class that I took, like no prerequisites. I was like, I want to fail this. I was like, I don't know, it doesn't matter how hard I try, I absolutely will fail this. And I was like, I never had that experience because I was successful at school. So I dropped that. I went undefined for the rest of the year. Met some dear friends of mine. Many of them have worked for me over the years. And some of my best friends, except for D, of course. To this day. And then I met someone that, or someone I was seeing at the time, knew someone that heard about this program in Chicago that had a video game program, and specifically like a video game design track.
So
And
is it
so,
like a certificate? Is it a degree that you have for that?
like an associate's degree in like applied science. It's like fucking going to clown college. It's like it's I mean, it got me where I needed to be, but it's
Yeah.
like it's kind of it's a joke in a way. It's like all things. It's like you get out of it what you put into it. Like I definitely went to school with a bunch of people that like just love video games and playing them, and like they just sat in class and played games all day, like on their parents' dime. But anyway,
Wow.
so I was scared shitless, and I was like, this is going to cost me so much money. And like, what if I guess wrong? And I was like, but I got to take a chance. And so I took out a fatty student loan that terrified me and went to school in Chicago for 2 years. And that's when I actually really got to start doing game design. So it was a very like project portfolio focused school. We would actually build games together. So I found a few people that I really enjoyed, and we would start like designing board games outside of school. So like every Friday we'd come together, design board games, shit like that. And that's when I actually really fell in love and figured out what game design even was. Ironically, at the time, we were in a class. We lost like our only coder in our class. They were supposed to make this game. Decided they weren't a coder and they were an artist, and so they were gonna have to break our team up unless we had someone to code the game. So ironically, I dropped my computer science major 2 years previously, and then I taught myself to code when I was in college, so I could build, so I could code the
on your
game that we're
free
working
time?
on. Yeah,
Oh,
I
nice.
just I got on YouTube and was like, how to make a grappling hook in Unity. That's literally I started learning making. That's no bullshit. I literally like that's how I learned to code. Was
Dude,
like
YouTube
just
is
Googling
the best right
and
now. In
YouTubing
today's
shit.
day and age, you can YouTube anything and you can learn anything.
I mean, after I went to college and paid all that money, I was like, man, I could learn all this on YouTube for free.
So really quick, so you were saying that you had, passions and like you were driven towards like more creative endeavors. And then just recently you mentioned that you started coming together with friends, I believe every Friday to create like board games, and that's when you said you really fell in love with it. So how did you like deduct that you wanted to get into this anyways? Like what other career paths were you looking at aside from like architecture, for example?
I love to write. Written like poetry and short stories like most of my life. But I was like, well, I'm not gonna be a writer because I'll starve to death probably. And so there was like writing and like film and other things like that. And so those were some of the things I was considering. And like other, yeah, like, architecture, like design, building type stuff. I don't even honestly remember all the stuff because I just remember feeling like I like to do so many different things, but none of them felt like they mapped to like a super, what I felt like was a viable career path for me. And so honestly, it kind of ended up being like, actually my dad reminded me this the other day. I think I designed a game when I was a kid and I wrote like, it was like, I think it was in sixth grade and I wrote like 40 pages of rules for this freaking game or some shit. I don't even remember. My dad told me this story the other day and I totally forgot it was a thing. So honestly, I kind of guessed and I got weirdly attached to this idea. To be honest, without a ton of foundation, because I was like, I'm going to try game design and I don't even really know exactly what that is.
Right.
But I was like, but I just felt like I had to try something because I knew I was kind of stuck where I was, and I was like, I got to try something, and I just got really lucky that I guessed right.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it sounds like you had like a sort of base like general idea of like what you're interested in. You took a leap of faith and then you ended up cultivating that passion with, through the classes and then along with other people.
Yeah,
You
100%.
decide-
Because I was like, I like to design characters and stories, and that was kind of my and like spaces, and so that was kind of my understanding of like game design at the time. Like, ooh, people make stories, right? And they make these characters in these games, right? And they make these levels, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because it
You know,
kind of
and I
fits all
guess
of that into one thing that you wanted to do. It fits like the
and
film, the architecture, the stories. It kind of fits it all into one nice little package for you.
yeah, and so it's like that isn't necessarily exactly how it ends up playing out, but those do become a lot of options for you. And like one concrete example, like Cinco, of like how I got a bit more of a taste early on is like, um, I would just I would end up like designing like we would just like different ways of playing airsoft with our friends, like different rules and shit like that, and like just little stuff
Wow.
like that where you end up kind of designing like, you know, sort of games. Another more concrete example is like when Forge, when they put Forge into Halo,
Oh
like
yeah,
on
yeah,
like a
yeah.
level,
That was
I went
awesome.
ham on that shit. And I was like, I would spend hours like making levels and all kinds of, and so that kind of gave me a bit more confidence that maybe that is something for me. But then I really got my first taste of like what the hell is game design actually. Because there's so many different types of game design. Like saying game design even is kind of a misnomer because there's
Right.
a lot of very distinct buckets of like the types of game design and the sort of even careers within that. So yeah. So yeah,
So, mm,
I went to school. Or do you have questions, Cinco?
no.
I went to school. I graduated, and I'll try to speed through this because I don't know how interesting this is, and we'll try to get in the meat of it faster.
You're,
But
you're totally fine.
It's all good.
I'm kind of a rambler, so you'll just have to interject and cut me off. But so I went to school and developed some great relationships, and then school was over. And I was like, well, I can't afford to live in Chicago, so I'm gonna move back home. So I moved back home, and I was working on a farm. Family friend of ours. I sent out like 70 resumes. I got 3 polite no's and 67 absolutely no responses.
Wow.
Oh, no.
And so I was like, I felt like I should do it on my own. I felt like I should try and stand on my own legs. But then I was like, I reached out to an instructor of mine and I was like, hey, I've tried and like I'm doing my best. And I feel like I'm hitting a wall and like I've put everything into this and like I'm like, I don't know where to go from here. And so he reached out to someone, a bunch of people in his network, because the video game industry is very big in terms of money, very small in terms of people. Everybody knows everybody. It's like
Oh,
a very
really?
cottage. It's a very cottage industry. Like everyone knows everyone, which we'll probably get into. But like,
Right.
there's like 2 or 3 degrees of separation tops. Like after working in the industry for a few years, you either know someone or you know someone that works at every major studio probably in the country. It's just that's how
Wow.
small
That
that's how
that's
small it is.
crazy. That's crazy.
Mhm.
And so I got total rejected. And he reached out to someone and was like, "Hey, do you have any design positions open?" And he was like, "No, but we have a design internship. So have this guy send in his stuff." Now you're upside down, D.
My
And
cam's
so
fighting me.
I sent in my stuff and I spun that. I was able to spun that into a design internship, where I was on like the prototyping team there. So we were like designing and prototyping, so like coding and building like really tiny games like on a daily, weekly basis to like pitch to management of like what new games, micro games that we were calling them at the time, we're going to put out there.
Are you able to disclose where you were working?
Oh, yeah, I worked at a place called Backflip Studios.
Mhm.
So they built a game that probably very few people will remember, but was very successful in the early App Store days. So they built a game called Dragon Veil, which blew up in the early App Store days.
Yeah,
I remember that
Made
actually.
I do too.
Yeah. So I wasn't a part of that. I came in after that. They made bundles and bundles and bundles of money, and that really blew their studio up from like 5 people to like 150 people. They got acquired by Hasbro, the toy company.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
And so I came on like right after the Hasbro acquisition. And so I was doing the prototyping team, a bunch of game design stuff, moved up into some more like advanced game design roles, and then ended up becoming the lead UI UX designer on Dragon Veil World, which was the sequel to that game. So I ended up working on the sequel to that. It was a miserable flop financially. It
You,
was not that, and that's like a whole series of episodes. But
you,
so I worked on that game for a few years. Go for it.
you said UI UX design. What
Yeah.
is that?
So it stands for user interface, user experience.
Okay.
So the simplest way to think about it, without diving too deep into it, is like thinking about like menu interface for games. So like the interactions of like how do you interact with the system. So like how do you feed your dragons? How do you plant your food? How do you make that fun and delightful and interesting and efficient and stuff like that? That's like the most surface, like
Okay.
sort of like UI way to think about it. And then now I run a UX company and we think about it a lot differently, but that's basically the gist of it. I ended up like wireframing the whole game in terms of like from an interface perspective. What does it look like? We did the feeding prototype, the farming prototype, like how do you make that like fun and delightful and not boring and stuff like that. So
That's really
I
cool.
ended up doing the lead UI UX design for that game. And then I met Jason along the way. He was kind of an outside UX consultant who had been doing UX for a lot of years. And I was kind of the inside UX guy. And so we worked together for a year or so there. And then at the beginning of 2018, the writing was on the wall. Studio was going down the tubes. We had lost millions and millions and millions of dollars. Genuinely, not an exaggeration. We had lost tens of millions of dollars. And the culture was starting to change. You know, a lot of my friends were either leaving or had already left, and it's the culture in the studio. There's a lot of long-standing issues, things like that. And so I was just looking to make my own fate, be a little bit more master my own destiny. So I left that and was like, hey, I'll go be a freelance game designer, freelance UX designer. Jason has some work. He'll shove me some work, and then, you know, I'll make my own games on the side or whatever. And so that ended up spiraling into what I do now. So what I do now is from that, we started a company called UXisFine. If you're familiar with the dog meme, you know, that's where our logo comes from. So yeah,
nice.
I run that company. I'm one of the co-founders, myself and two other guys. And I basically am the head of the UX department. So I develop our UX design processes. I develop our team. I hire people, and we've got about 20 or 30 people that work for us pretty much full time. And so what we do is
that's
we basically
quite a lot of people.
It is.
Yeah, we've grown a lot in the last like year or two, really the last year. So basically what we do now is a lot from a game design perspective, but also from a user experience design perspective. We basically come in and help people make their games more fun, more compelling, more engaging. You know, people have games that they aren't fun, or they're not kind of achieving the vision they want, and they can't necessarily understand why, or maybe
Brawlhalla.
maybe so that's the Brawlhalla is the topic, right? And so, or they need help taking their game to a new platform, right? So like Brawlhalla trying to stretch to mobile, making a PC game is wildly different, right? So like we come in and lend expertise of like helping take games to new platforms, helping add new features to live games. So we work on console, PC, mobile, big games, small games. We've worked on Fortnite, you know, some other big titles. You know, I'm currently working on another like successful shooter that I can't disclose. But yeah, we worked with like some of the biggest. We work with some of the biggest studios out there. We also work with some small studios. It kind of depends. So yeah, I've worked on a bunch of games, bunch of genres, from a game design UX perspective. And then also have also done a bunch of like coding and implementation. So I've implemented a shitload of UI. I built a lot of the UI in Unity for Dragonvale World. I actually rebuilt almost all of the UI for the Elder Scrolls Legends card game. So the Elder Scrolls Legends CCG. I basically, when they did the style revamp and it went from Direwolf to Sparky Pants, I basically worked with those guys. A lot of them work with us now, and rebuilt all that UI and stuff like that. So, yeah.
So the original, and correct me if I'm wrong, the original reason for creating your own company was issues with culture beforehand from working with others, or you wanted your own take, or what was the motive or the idea?
It was really like I wanted to be master my own destiny. I wanted to.
Oh yeah.
No, you're good. I mean, it's multiple things. So I got really frustrated, and it was really tough being put in a position where you felt like you're being asked to design something kind of with like both hands tied behind your back. So there was a lot of like trust issues between like the management layer, and a lot of the design team felt like we were put in this really tiny constrained box of like what we were able to do. So like one example, like the game was like really dying at one point. I mean, it was like right after we launched it, it was like it was not successful. And so we were like working on a pitch for like, hey, we think we can really revamp the game to fit this more modern market. And we did all this research and all this stuff. And it was just, the long and the short of it is, to oversimplify it, it was just like shut down. And so it was really frustrating, kind of really wanting to do your job and wanting to be held accountable. And you're like, hey, if this sucks and we make it suck, like you can fire us, like you can hold us accountable, but give us the opportunity and give us the chance. So that was a frustrating thing. Also, the game industry is like super notorious for burnout, super notorious for like just, and I don't mean where I was working, I mean everywhere, like very poorly planned, poorly managed, poorly budgeted. Like, so it's very, the shit you'll read online about, people burning out, working crazy hours and stuff like that. That's very real. That's something I was definitely experiencing. And the other thing was just like, I don't know, I wanted to sink or swim on my own. And I felt like I would have a lot more opportunities, not necessarily being tied down to someone else's leadership. And I learned a lot there. I learned a lot about, to be candid, I learned a lot about how to run a company by seeing how
not
not to
to.
run a company,
Yeah.
Yeah,
so.
that makes sense. And since you mentioned burnout, I want to ask you for your take on it. Like, how much of burnout do you think comes with like working too much or like working for too long of a duration, like over years and years, or how much would come from the environment and like just factors like that?
It's A and B. So I think it's, if you work, 50, 60 hours a week, or you're working, 6, 7 days a week, even for like short bursts, you keep doing that over and over again. There's just only so much gas you have in the tank. But the other big part of it is the motivation, right? Like there's a difference between working 60 or 70 hours a week because your heart's on fire about what you're doing, you fucking love it, and you want to ship this badass thing and you're excited about it. That's a different environment and a different motivation than like there's just too much work and the deadlines are too looming, and we're kind of like, maybe it's not said out loud, but it's kind of said that like, we've got to hit this date. And so it a lot of it is the culture and environment and mutual trust and respect. If you're really banded together and you really believe in something and you feel respected and seen in your job, and you're kind of like from the top to bottom, you're really aligned on what you're trying to make and that vision, and you feel like people give a shit about you and you're kind of all doing it together, that's one thing. But when you feel like this is like, mandates coming down from the ivory tower, or other people's poor decision making putting you in a bad spot where you have to crunch and can't get stuff done, and you don't have that kind of mutual love and like camaraderie across your team or your organization, that's when it wears on you much faster.
Makes sense.
So I have a question, even though my cam's dying again. You mentioned something about like being put in this box with your hands tied behind your back, and like to where like you and other devs of the game come up with an idea that you all think could be severely beneficial to it, but it gets shut down. Like, who's it getting shut down by, right? Because I feel like this is where a big disconnect comes in the community of like people who play the games and try and communicate with the devs. They think devs have total control and say of whatever is happening to the game, right? Yeah, that's definitely a community thing, right? Like we see it in Brawlhalla right now, because everybody attacks the devs, because the devs are the ones that come out and say like, oh, this is what we want to do, that this is kind of where our future plans are, and then those future plans never happen, and we're kind of wondering like, are they getting shut down from somebody up top? Like, are their hands tied? Is our anger misplaced? Right?
Yeah. So I mean, it kind of it really depends. Every studio, every relationship is different, right? So like one key thing to understand, like if you're not familiar with the industry, is you have the developer, right? So this is the studio making the game, right? These are the people that make the actual thing. They're the people that design it, they build it, they make the art, and then sometimes you have a publisher, right? So in this case, you've got BMG, which is the developer. And for a long time, I'm assuming they were self-published, right? So BMG develops the game. They also publish, so they do their own marketing. Like it is put out by BMG, and they're a self-contained developer / publisher, right? They're their own. They are their only master. They only answer to themselves, right? And there's a hierarchy within there that I'll get into, but then you have a publisher, right? So then Ubisoft, even if Ubisoft didn't buy BMG, for example, Brawlhalla could have been a game that, is built by BMG, but published by Ubisoft, right? And as soon as you introduce that relationship, every dev publisher relationship is different. Some have a lot more top heavy control where the publisher controls a lot more things. Some come in and they see a very successful dev super good at what they do, and they just see it as an advantageous, mutually beneficial business relationship where like, yo, we're going to invest in y'all and we're going to publish this thing, but it's because we think we can bolster you maybe in areas where you're weak, but you can also be a financial boon to us. And so some publishers are, with relationships are super hands off because they're like, y'all are great at what you do, and we're just trying to basically pile onto that, pour some more gas on the fire, help out where we can, and honestly get a bigger pie that we can share together, right? So you have the developer publisher relationship where that's one of the first layers where like weirdness can come in, where like, this publisher has goals and this developer has goals, and if they don't align, then immediately that's where you're gonna see some discrepancies between what one group wants and what the other group wants. And a very similar, if you go inside of developer, and this is like totally different for different companies because they structure themselves differently. But even if you just think about BMG, I don't know exactly how their team is structured, how they make decisions, but a lot of games will have like, a game director, right? And at the end of the day, that person, there is a shot caller that, with the input from a lot of other people, you'll have a game director that's like a creative director. It's probably in charge of more of like the design stuff. You'll probably maybe have like a product owner that is a little bit more in charge of like the dollars and donuts and like the schedule and like the money part of the game. And then you'll have like an engineering director. They're just in charge of like, making sure that we're doing things in an efficient, effective, holistic way, making sure our engineering standards and like our tech pipeline and things like that's really solid. Then you'll have like an art director who's like, they control the visual.
So there's just
of the game.
there's a lot of layers in the hierarchy that can affect like you said, discrepancies between like the dev team, some of the people that you see that are like talking about what they want to do on the dev team, and then like how it actually gets done. There's a chopping order. You're not just talking to a dev and the dev says we want to add this to the game, and then they just decide they don't want to, right? There's definitely layers that they have to go through. There's red tape.
And the last caveat I would add on that topic is that like people do it really differently. I mean, some teams are very flat in terms of hierarchy. Generally, the bigger the team, the more hierarchy you have. But some directors really defer to their team, and they're just a voice and a champion for their team. And so if their team together wants to do the thing, their director will champion that upward wherever they need to or whatever. And some people are much more like, no, I'm the vision holder, this is the way it's going to be. So part of it is like a logistical, like what is the structure, but also part of it is how do you operate within the structure, because you can be a director and do it very different ways.
Right.
But there is definitely layers at the end of the day. There are people that make decisions and there are people that don't.
Right.
And a lot of times there's definitely some amount of layer between the people that do the work and the people that make the decisions. And when you have healthy teams, there's a ton of mutual respect and feedback and listening between those, because you do have to balance goals, right? Sometimes the thing that you want to do, maybe that you think is awesome for your game, sometimes you have to understand that maybe that's not the most financially beneficial for the game. And no one likes to hear that because it sounds gross, like, oh, it's all about money. But the game doesn't survive without continued revenue. And so the classic, if I had to summarize it, the classic, thing in the game industry is balancing business goals and creative goals, right? And finding the harmony where those things come together and benefit each other, not fight. Because when they fight, it's just like, yeah, it gets tough.
Right.
So let me think. Did you have a question, Maury?
Yeah. I kind of backtrack a little bit because it still all fits together, because you're saying you got to have like this nice harmony between your group, your team, right? What was it like at Backflip? Because you said you got in there right after they had that amazing game, right? So you were kind of there for them blowing up into this giant studio.
I was kind of there after. Sorry, finish your question.
I was just wondering like what it was like what's it kind of like for a company that blows up really fast like that? Is it chaos? Is it kind of like a mess to handle and like handle that type of thing? Because
Yeah.
like
Go.
at least from my perspective, that's it. Maybe it wasn't like an overnight thing for BMG for Brawlhalla, but definitely since COVID has happened, Brawlhalla has like really just kind of blown up, right? The amount of players, the amount of active players, the amount of just attention it's gotten, viewers. I mean, the game has exploded within like a year and a half time span. So like that could also be a potential like issue that we're dealing with here, is that you've got a company that's exploded and now they're trying to find that harmony still.
Yeah, and I mean, I think and we'll probably get back to it. I think the BMG thing, like, if I had to fathom a guess, I'm sure that that's a big factor. I'd be willing to bet dollars to donuts. The Ubisoft thing is the biggest factor in what their goals are, like, which I'll get back to, because I actually was looking at the platform releases, and I was looking at like updates like across the game for like the last few years, and like you can see a pretty obvious and clear, predictable path about some of the stuff they've done, and I'll speak to it in a little bit of like,
Okay, cool.
I did piece together what I think they're doing and the mode they're kind of in. I could be dead ass
Ooh.
wrong. I'm using my crystal ball, so I could be wrong as fuck. But
I'm so interested.
I could be super fucking wrong, but it's not that surprising because you see it all the time. But to take it back to Backflip, so I came in a few years after Dragon Veil had blown up, but they had built so fast, and I came in right after the Hasbro acquisition. So Hasbro bought like 72% of the company for like $112 million or something.
Jesus.
Oh.
And so they had built a shit ton of value, and Hasbro was coming in and looking at us to kind of be their kind of figurehead in the mobile game space. You know, Hasbro had they had done a lot of publishing deals, a bunch of like, you know, no offense, but like second-rate studios just making like Battleship and Monopoly and bullshit on mobile.
Yeah.
But they really wanted to kind of what they saw as a big player in mobile, and they hoped that we could be that with some of the brands that we had and things like that. So it definitely was chaos, because what happens is, you know, what people don't necessarily understand is like running a company of 20 or 30 people, you know, is very different. And they were probably 10 or 15 even maybe when they launched that game. Is very different than running a company of 70, 80, 100, 150 people. It's just it's apples and airplanes. It's totally fucking different. You get put in a totally different place. You have to make totally different decisions. And so what happened was you get all this success, and with success comes pressure to build, right? Like we just made tens and tens and hundreds of millions of dollars. The logical thing for a lot of people is like, make the thing bigger, let's make more money.
Right.
But that means when you don't have things in place to understand your success. So like the way I describe Dragon Veil to people is like, it's awesome, and I actually know a ton of the people, and actually some of them still work for me, that originally concepted that game, because actually, ironically, that game was conceived by a little studio called Phobic that my friend Brian started like out of high school or when they all quit college. And they actually had Dragon Veil as a concept, and they took it to Backflip, and they're like, yo, we need help building this. So they basically went looking for a publisher, and in kind of a, you know, analogous situation, and they did it together, and it exploded. But a lot of what happened is they had a ton of success, but they didn't understand that success, and they didn't understand like how to repeat it.
Yeah.
And so it's like if you close your eyes and hit a home run, you don't know how to, you know, hit a home run again or hit a base hit even. And
Definitely.
so it was like we made a really successful game. We hired a shitload of people. We started making 3, 4, 5 games at a time, and we didn't have a strong culture of how to find a great game.
Yeah.
A lot of concepts, spent millions of dollars building them. A lot of them, some of them really weren't that fun, and they weren't right market fits. They weren't, you know, and so we didn't have a process. And that's a big part of what I do at my company now. We didn't have a process for how do you take the fuzzy idea, refine it, test it, know when to throw it out because it's crap, and how do you filter those things down into honing a really well positioned, well designed, compelling, engaging game? And so we repeatedly put out a bunch of games. Some of them even had like, acclaim. We won a bunch of Editor's Choice Awards, mostly because I think Apple really liked us.
Nice.
But those games financially, like almost all of them lost money. And so that's what I'd say is like we grew too fast and we didn't have a process and an understanding of like, how do you have a method? Because making games is never going to be like 1, 2, 3, make $1 million, right? It's so fucking hard. It is so hard. People do not understand how hard it is to make a good game, just a good game that doesn't make any money, and then make a good game that makes enough money to keep going. Like it is unbelievably difficult. And we didn't have methods. We didn't have methods for decision making. We didn't have a good hierarchy in place. There was a lot of like seizing of control from people at the top level who are actually dear friends of mine to this day, and I still love them, and they're great people. But when you've got a baby and it's worth millions of dollars, and it can be very scary to let go of that control and say, hey, I've hired people that I believe in, I respect, I trust you guys, make good decisions. Because you're like, it's my ass on the line, it's my millions of dollars, right?
Right.
And it's just like, I'm the one that stands to lose the most. So I can understand how hard it is to let go of that control, but that is a leadership thing that you have to do. And that's I think one of the bigger areas where we struggled was we had a shit ton, and everyone that worked there felt this way. We had a shit ton of talent in that studio, and we didn't have the right things in place to trust those people to go make great stuff. And so we kind of hamstrung. The team ended up being hamstrung, and not being able to do our best work because there was some decisions that came down from the top very frequently that we felt like should have been our decisions to make.
Interesting.
That's a lot to digest.
Yeah.
It is,
Wait,
but it's really interesting across the board. Is there any companies that you would say, like, whether you've worked with them or not, but like you'd say that actually does have that good environment and understands like how to have that good process, and like that they understand what to do and have that consistent success in your eyes?
So I would say, I'm trying to think.
it sounds like a hard one.
There's so many dysfunctional game studios. So
Or even if that's like perhaps too hard, like what would separate all of these dysfunctional game studios to create, like a more ideal environment?
So part of it is a big part of it is honestly just it's kind of having the right people that have the right attitudes. It's like if you're going to be a director of something, your job is to not have all the good ideas. Your job, like, and even as a game designer, I mean, yes, your job is like, somewhat generating concepts and refining them and things like that. But a lot of times your job as a game designer, it's not to have the best ideas, it's to find the best ideas, and get them into the game, right? That doesn't matter where they come from. And I think very much as a director, it really, which is what I do now, like you have to have people in leadership that respect and trust their teams, and defer to them and challenge their teams when they need to be challenged, right? To justify things and make good decisions. But I think that's a big part of it. And so part of that is having the right spirit and, in place in the right positions. A big part of it is honestly, it's having a process. It's having a process about how we go about doing things here. How do we confidently not give us all the answers, but how do we get to the answers? How do we have good results? Because if I had to, I mean, this is kind of the backbone of my company now, and it's why we get so sought after by people. Is like we are all about process, and we're all about having a method to repeatable success, right? And having more of a scientific method. And then the other thing I'll say is, in general, this isn't always true, but this is so much easier with smaller teams. So if you go look at, like some indie PC games on Steam and shit like that, like Clay, I don't know Clay or people there personally, but they've got a vision. They make similar types of games. It's a small team. I would be willing to bet there's a lot of equal voices on that team and a lot of like mutual respect and a lot of like we've all got similar skin in the game. And I'm sure there's decision makers, but I would generally say this probably tends to be more true with smaller teams. The bigger teams you get, there's more bureaucracy, there's more red tape.
Yeah.
It gets harder and harder to do this because frankly you have way more humans involved. You know, right now we're working on a game.
Way more humans and way more money.
Way more money. That's another thing because when more money is involved, the risks get way bigger and way scarier because you're talking about tens and tens of millions of dollars. But we're working on a game right now, and like, I don't know, the team is probably, I don't even know. The team's probably it's got to be 300 or more people.
Jeez.
Wow.
400 people. Like
Jeez.
easily. It might be 400 people. I don't know. And maybe that's an over exaggeration. It's hard for me to tell. This team's easily got to be 200 or more people off the top of my head, easily. And so it gets really hard to establish some of that stuff. But I think the last thing, and I'm rambling a little bit. The last thing I'll add is a clear vision for what you're making and what the game is. That's void of the specific mechanics or specific execution. Because you got to remember, like, a game starts as a very formless, kind of vague, it's kind of this plus that, like, that has inspired us in the past. Like, you know, so many games get started as like peanut butter and jelly pitches. Like, it's Breath of the Wild plus Brawlhalla. Someone's gonna green like that for millions of dollars. You know, it's just like, but having a clear vision that you can actually articulate to your team before the thing is designed, you know, trying to capture the experience that you're trying to give players before you have the specific form of the finished game, that is a huge piece of getting rid of some of all this confusion and issues that studios have, because a lot of times people don't have a really clear vision. And that's something we help studios with a lot too, is like, okay, your slide deck is really neat, but no one knows how to make those 7 words you just put on that slide deck. So what are we actually trying to make?
Yeah, definitely.
So fundamentally, like, very clear process, and very, like, you know, taking a vision and making it crystal clear, something that everybody understands. And what kind of what I want to ask about processes and like how you come up with one, or what are the steps involved in like a process, so to speak, because it seems kind of like vague right now.
Yeah. I wish, see, if I was more prepared, I'd walk you guys through some visuals and some stuff. I'm trying to think of like a off the cuff, like verbal examples. So, for example, like, I guess I'll just try to use our UX process. So, for example, like we get like a new feature, right? We get a new feature. Someone wants us to put this in their game. Maybe we're building their game from scratch, and we get to, you know, their heroes feature, right? About selecting a hero and, you know, all these other things you can do with heroes in the game or fucking whatever, right? So like the first thing that we do that's part of our process is establish really clear feature goals that are written from the player's perspective of, this is what the player wants to be true about their experience to consider this feature successfully delivering what we think the player wants to experience as part of this. And like outlining those in a really crystal clear codified way and prioritizing them. So we're like, dude, if we got to make some tough choices, this is what's number 1, this is number 2, this is number 3. And so then that's part of our process, is like making sure we outline those feature goals, making sure we do a kickoff with the teams and say, hey, we read all your documents, we played the game, this is what we think matters in this order, does this make sense to you? We riff, we have a conversation, we're like, okay, did we miss some priorities, did we miss some goals? That gives us concrete alignment so that when we get to the design phase, we're not just subjectively debating of like, I think this is better, I think this is cool, because no one cares what any of us think. The game's not for us, the game's for the players. And so defining at the beginning, then we can have really objective conversations about designs. And it's not about, I like this, I like that. It's like, well, does it serve goal number 1 better or goal number 2 better? Does it not serve the goals which of these designs serves the goals that we've all aligned on better? And so And then we start like high level, like blocking in. So this is like napkin sketches of like, big blocks and just kind of figuring out how you might navigate through these area of the games. We iterate on that. We meet with the team on a weekly basis. Then we kind of get a sign off, and then we move into like more detailed wireframing where we're kind of capturing like more pixel perfect, like nitty gritty where all this shit goes and figuring out. So it's like, that is still a little hand wavy, but that's like kind of 100 miles an hour run through of like, if we don't have that process, God only knows where we're going to end up, because everyone just designs differently. Who knows if we're talking to the right people at the right time, like, having the right decision points, having a methodology of like starting in low fidelity and then getting like high fidelity. And also how we work with the artists on our team is another big process evolution that we've made this year of like, we do the UX. So like we make ugly boxes on the screen. They make the boxes pretty basically. And how we formalize when we meet with them and how we meet with them and how they give us feedback and how they help us, how they push back on us, how we push back on them, because there's a world where like, well, they just start designing the feature at the same time as us. And then like, we just have two different people like designing in different directions. So like we have to integrate at the right time in the right ways so that they can kind of do the handoff baton toss and put the layer of like sexy over top of our ugly boxes that we've drawn on this. So that's kind of that. When I talk about process, that's an example of a little bit what I mean.
Yeah, I think that helped me out a lot. It sounds like a ton of communication consistently and taking like yourself out of the process, because like you said, everyone's putting themselves in the player's shoes. Like it's not about what you think; it's about what they should feel when when a product is out. So that helped a lot, and that was really good off the cuff. That was amazing to me. Maury, looked like you had something to say.
What? Okay, I don't know if this is like a situation you've run into personally yet, or what. What happens when you add a feature or do something like this to where you say you capture the player's experience, you drop the game comes out and it doesn't, right? It doesn't work well. How do you go about, like, how hard is it to like go back and fix these mistakes?
Depends on how big the mistakes are. So it's like, I guess I'll try to simplify it down into a couple things. So if you're talking about like a whole game, that's like a big thing, right? Because if we drop the game and it's just like sad trombone, like one of two things have happened, right? So what we do at the beginning is we outline it. We have a specific framework for it. It's like this proprietary thing that I designed with a guy that works with me, and we define a really clear vision, right? And it's like, if you put your game out and it flops, there's really a couple things that could be true. There's you missed your vision, so you actually defined a compelling experience for people, but you actually didn't achieve it, right? You achieved your vision, but no one gives a crap about it, and you made a game that people are just you achieved your vision, but fundamentally there's just not enough of a market out there for it, right? That's kind of like borderline nail in the coffin. Like, you achieve the vision, but there's just not enough people out there to sustain it. Maybe your marketing was poorly positioned, or maybe you can fix some things there. But in the case where you didn't quite achieve the vision, and so it's not resonating with people, that's why you have to have a clear vision. Because if you don't have a clear vision, you can't basically stack up, okay, this is what we thought we were making, and we all believe that people would be interested and spend money on this. You don't have the A to compare to the B, right? And so when you have the clear vision, then you can put together user tests, other things like that, get user feedback, interview people, bring them into the studio, or there's all kinds of methods to get feedback about why things aren't working. But that missing piece is, if you don't know what the target was supposed to be, you can't test against the target, because you're like, well, why don't they like it, right? So you do a bunch of user tests. It kind of, first you have to figure out like, well, how big is the problem, right? Is it that our core combat just isn't fun? Is it that our controls are clunky? Is it that, our crafting system, like, no one fucking knows how it works? And it just kind of, you really have to, again, you kind of have to have the vision to compare it to get the scope of the problem. So it's like, it's kind of a loaded question, like, how hard is it? It's as hard as the problem is, like, in terms of like, it could be a really small problem, or it could be a really big problem. It could be like systemic across the whole game or specific features. But that's when user testing and like iteration comes in, and you really have to get players involved to figure out why is it not engaging them and thought the way that you thought it would.
Definitely.
So
Wow.
developers, listen to your community.
I'm done. So before we get into, I guess, what we call the meat of it, did we have anything else we wanted to cover beforehand?
It's the meat of it. For
I feel like we kind of are in the meat of it.
Yeah.
I've kind of thrown ourselves in there a little bit, but
It's all meat and potatoes all night.
all night.
Yeah,
It is.
I did have
I have one question too after.
So would you say that like the vision, you're going with this vision, right? So you actually hit this vision, right? And it does amazing things. The game actually does great things, and then the game blows up. Does that vision have to change? If your game blows up, should you readjust your vision so that way, like, because now you're not some small indie game that's a couple hundred people are playing. You've got 50 million people playing, and should your vision change? Should you kind of like reassess where, or do you just let it run and be like, we did good, we did great, let's just let it keep going and wait until we come out with game number 2 or something?
I mean, should you is kind of a loaded question. It kind of depends on, because there's layers of goals here, right? So there's when I say vision for the game, I'm speaking specifically about the experiential vision of the game. What is the game supposed to provide to people? What's it supposed to feel like, right? So I don't know Brawlhalla well enough to try and rattle it off the top of my head, but it's just like, what is that experience, right? What are people showing up for, like, in terms of the core gameplay? So in my mind, no, that shouldn't change,
Okay.
and in most cases wouldn't change, because that's kind of your entire hypothesis of why people are here. Like, it's no longer, it's a vision, but you've in theory executed on it. So it's like what you are providing, 50 million people are telling you they want, right?
Right.
And so that's like, well, we hit the mark and we picked the right one, right? And so it's like, you wouldn't want to change that experiential vision, but some of your priorities may change, right? In terms of, this is again where the business versus creative and how do you find synergies between those things come in, right? So your priorities are definitely probably going to shift, for sure, but the vision may get added to. So like, here's like a classic example, kind of like an abstract simplified example. You make a game, let's take Brawlhalla. I don't know enough about it, but like Brawlhalla, hardcore, pretty competitive, like pretty precision input, like fighting game, right? And it blows up. And so the natural inclination for people is like, how do we bring more people into the game, right? So you could easily see, like, we're going to put guilds in the game, or we're going to put this in the game. We're going to put these other features that don't necessarily eat away at the core of what Brawlhalla is and like degrade the fighting experience, but it may offer other experiences that, for different player types may make the game more interesting to me than it was before, or may give me a new spectrum of experiences within Brawlhalla as a product, right? So it's like, adding to the vision is different than changing your core of your vision, because the other part is your vision has priorities to it. There's like your P1s, that is the game. That is the fighting, that's the combat. Your P2s are kind of the things that are around that core that are pretty integral to supporting it. Your P3s are like, yeah, these are your skins, these are other crap that you add to the game so people spend more money on it. It's like, this is the story that 50% of people won't read on your characters, and some people will. And so like, that's the kind of outer layer. So it's like, if you fuck with the core, that's very dangerous, right? But like, people will layer stuff on and add to the vision, and that's a lot of games do that when they have success.
Is it more difficult when you're across, like, how much more difficult is it when you're across multiple platforms? Does it make that big of a difference?
It depends on how smart you were in making that transition. So some people like are not super, I don't want to say they're not smart. Some people like cave to like the deadlines of, we got to get this thing out, and so each platform could be a little bit more hand rolled, and it could be harder. Like, let's say we want to add something to one platform. It's like, oh God, this is 3x the effort because we have 3 platforms. That's kind of the inefficient way to do it. If you set yourself up for success in the beginning, it's not as hard, and pushing something to one platform. But at the end of the day, like, take a screen, for example. Like the controls for Brawlhalla, I'm assuming, right? Like the controls for Brawlhalla are going to be wildly different on a mobile touchscreen device, and the
Right.
interfaces are going to be wildly different than PC. So there is some cruising amount of cost of, like, when you add stuff across platforms, it does take significantly more, but you can help yourself by sharing designs and sharing tech as much as is possible. So it definitely adds a real deal amount of effort, but it kind of depends on the type of game you have, and does it have really unique challenges? Because, like, as soon as you have like a hardcore, like, mouse and keyboard kind of game, and you're gonna try and put that like with 2 thumbs on a touch device, like that, depending on like the input scheme, that could be a beast in and of itself.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. That was it for me. I'm sorry. I kept
That-
going, Moiru.
No, you're good.
That was great. That just
really- yeah.
something blew my mind about that.
Definitely had me think about some stuff for sure.
Maury, please take it.
Well, before I was asking my question, it's interesting because when you were saying that, like the thing I was thinking about was like the League of Legends mobile game was like how explaining like League has so many inputs you have to do, and then having to do that and transfer to mobile was like really interesting to see the transition. But specific, more back to my question, which is kind of off topic, but and obviously this isn't specific your specific field, but I'm hoping you may have some insight into it. So when one thing that's really big in the fighting game community has been the netcode for it, right? And I wanted to know like how hard is it for one, is it how hard is it for implementation of netcode into games, and if you believe companies should put that into their like one of their priorities when they make their games in terms of like their decisions for how their game is their decisions on their way that their combat or whatever their core of their game is, because a lot of times some fighting games, like some older fighting games, can't support it because the way that they're built doesn't allow it for some of them, or at least as we've been told. So I was wondering what your thoughts on that were.
I'm going to be 1,000% honest, admit that I fully don't know what you mean by netcode.
So okay, so what is the easiest way to explain it? So for a lot of games,
delay and rollback.
yeah. So like a lot of games run what is called delay based netcode, which is like for the netcode, it's basically you're both inputting when you're playing online. You're both inputting things at the same time.
Are you talking about like networking, like code for like multiplayer online, or?
Yeah, basically like the connections, like the services in which they use it, because most companies use delay based netcode, which is not good. Well, it's harder to use because if you don't have really good connection, it can be very dicey. Rollback has consistently been better, and most companies don't use it for some reason. It's really weird.
Oh, okay. So I'll try to speak to it a little bit. I don't know that I'm as educated enough on the tech side, and specifically on fighting games. So
Yeah, that's fine.
fighting games obviously present this really unique challenge, right? Because timing is like so fucking insane in fighting games, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about people like bitching about like 0.02 seconds was changed in this animation delay, and like people are just raging on Reddit because it's a game where precision matters that much, right? And so I don't know enough about the tech to speak super intelligently about it, but I would say if there's a thing that's better for the game and players view as like, I get more precision out of this and I don't get screwed by having a bad connection, if that's kind of the sentiment and people aren't doing it, it's almost certainly because the cold hard truth is it's more complicated and more expensive. Like that's what it would come down to. Like, I mean, that's really what it comes down to, is like, if there's something that like overwhelming majority of people like feel gives them a better experience, and they don't necessarily maybe get cheated out of like these weird delays because they're lag, and it's not being done, it's, the cold hard truth is it's a time and money thing, and people are taking kind of the easier way out you know, and I don't know if that's because they're just like, well, people that are that hardcore are at tournaments and they're playing on locally connected things. So, you know, the people that are online don't care that much, or they're not that hardcore, or because the other thing is people have to realize is like everything is percentages, right? So it's like what percentage of players in this environment does this matter to, right? And I think one thing that's really hard to understand sometimes as players is like, fuck man, this is fucking me. Like this is fucking up my experience. And I think it's at the end of the day, like there's a player respect thing, but there's also like a business thing, right? Because what people may not realize is like you may be a really pissed off part of 10% of the population, right? And you may be the most important 10% of the population, because not all parts of the game population are created equal, because you know there's people that pay the most money, there's the people that come back, there's the people that evangelize the game to other people. So it's like different player bases. Like, so your most hardcore players are always going to be the smallest percentage, because it's just statistically how it works, but they are some of your most important players by far, right? And so again, not being able to speak too intelligently about it, I would be willing to bet that if people haven't done it, it's just because it either, so like on a forward going way, if they're not doing this better method, it's just because it's more costly and time intensive. If you're talking about like retroactively updating their game to like put this better method in their game because their game is already live and already exists, I will tell you that is a bitch of an undertaking. I mean, that is like to re-architect potentially like fundamentally how your network code works. That could be such a big endeavor for a game that's already live. So yeah, I don't, I'm not the most informed on that topic for sure, and I'm not a real deal software engineer, but I would be willing to bet that that's just a kind of thing where if your game is out there and it's got a pretty big audience and a cruising altitude, like it's a pretty costly move to do that. And you also have to remember, like, people are constantly weighing this, like, redo the network code or add this new feature or add this new character. It's like everything is a trade-off. It's like,
definitely.
you know, so.
No, that was insightful regardless. Because it's just interesting because like a lot of companies, like more, at least a lot of fighting game companies recently have been taking the time to do so with.
Yeah.
And that's mainly because it's been a insane uproar for a lot of companies, where because a lot of people stop playing certain fighting games altogether because of the netcode. And Billion will just like we will not support you if you don't have like good netcode. And then like even when you're talking about like changing retroactively is also very interesting, because I've only seen one game ever do it, and it took them over a year to fully implement it. And I mean, granted, at the end of the day, it was worth it because like people still play that game to this day. And it's been about 8 years since it came out, and they've already have one out of afterwards. So
Was that for BlazBlue?
no, those games don't count because those games most of them don't even have like actual connectivity back then. I'm talking about Mortal Kombat X.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh shit. Okay.
Mortal Kombat. Yeah, NetherRealm. Like, yeah, they rebuilt the entire netcode for that. After people were saying, because the netcode was really really bad for MKX prior, and so they rebuilt it for rollback netcode, and people still play it to this day, even though like Mortal Kombat 11 is out
and has been out for years.
Yeah. And people prefer that one over this one. So just goes to show you a little bit.
Man.
But thank you. That was really interesting and very insightful.
Yeah. So let's like really get into it. So it came up like way early. I mean, it's come out a few times during our duration here, which is Brawlhalla, and how you've done some research into it, and you've seen like, you know, maybe perhaps some patch notes over the years. And you said you saw like some patterns, or like you could see the direction almost.
Yeah, so again, I didn't have a ton of time to look into it, so I was like, this is some super armchair fucking research. So take it for what you will. So like I was just flipping through, so like I was like, okay, they get bought by Ubisoft, I think in 2018, right?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah.
They get bought by Ubisoft in 2018. I think at the time that studio's like 25, 27 people. I think they had just kind of opened They just opened a studio, another studio or another location, some country in Europe, which I'm assuming was, you know, partially off the back of Brawlhalla success, partially off the back that they probably knew some of these offers. People would come sniffing around to scoop them up. And so then you kind of look at, and I think console. Actually, let me see if I have these on my phone. I took some pictures of shit because I knew I'd forget it. 1 second.
And that's true prep right there.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, where's
Um, the
do-do-do-do-do.
priorities and everything taking away from something else is
Yeah.
just the balance.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this has been.
Oh yeah, here we are.
has
So
been amazing.
these are some of the things I was looking at. So yeah, so they came out in 2017. It launched on basically, you know, Mac, Windows, PS4, right? So that's 2017. And then they got bought in like May or early 2018. They come out with Switch and Xbox, you know, in November 6, 2018. So either that was already in the works, or that was something as kind of like a first initiative that like Ubisoft helped them get to or wanted them to get to. So I mean, either way, the trajectory of the game is like pretty straightforward in terms. And then the big one that tells the story, in my opinion, is the mobile launch in 2020, right? So this is a classic story of we make a game, we put it out on a platform, it's kind of niche. I'm sure BMG never in their wildest dreams thought it would be as successful as it was. I'm sure that they hoped that it would be, but you know, have a shitload of success. And so the natural thing is like, okay, well, how do we've got this game, it's fucking killing it on PC and PS4. Like, okay, well, how do we get it to other platforms to make more money, right? How do we make the game? And it's not just like, oh, money grubbing. It's just like, how do we take the game to more people, get more people to enjoy it, and make the company more sustainable, right? So it's like, okay, go to Switch, go to Xbox. But then for like a fairly hardcore fighting game, the leap to mobile is a much less obvious one, right? That's a much bigger challenge, right? And it's kind of a big swing. And again, I don't know Brawlhalla well enough, but I imagine like a fighting game that's even remotely competitive, immensely difficult to put on mobile and like basically not make it suck, right?
Yeah.
And have that be an experience that anyone wants to play, right? It's like taking Counter-Strike and putting Counter-Strike on mobile, right? Like,
Right.
and no one wants to play with the filthy casuals on mobile, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a very obvious trajectory of like game has success, take it to more platforms, repeat the success, spread the success with kind of the same given formula, right? Because it's like if it isn't broke, don't fix it kind of deal. And so I imagine that Ubisoft saw the growing success because I don't know if I had this other one. I saw a tweet. I found a tweet from the guy that runs the studio. Oh yeah, here it is. Yeah. Because yeah, May 2014, 1,000 monthly active users. May 2015, 40,000. May 2016, 700,000. May 2017, 790,000. And then May 2018, 2.3 million. May 2019, 3.8 million. May 2020, 7.5 million. And that would have been right before, I believe, the mobile launch. Yeah, because that was in August, and now they're up to like some crazy fucking number of monthly active users. And so Ubisoft would have been aware of that trend of like, holy shit, more and more and more and more people are playing this game. And so, you know, that's becomes a classic acquisition target. Sometimes it might just become a publishing target, but they obviously saw BMG. They're like, holy shit, they've made this wildly successful game that's like weirdly niche, but it's succeeding crazily on PC. Can we? I mean, it's oh, this is one of the other things I was going to say is, you know, basically, can we get in on that action? Can we help extend the success of the game and help them financially take it to other platforms? You know, through expertise, through security, right? Giving BMG the security and the runway to go hire a bunch of people to take this thing to other platforms to kind of take it to the moon. Because what people don't necessarily realize is like, you know, the PC market and the console markets are big, but in certain audiences they get dwarfed compared to mobile. Like the amount of people you can reach on mobile, again, if your game's super hardcore, maybe not as many, but like the amount of reach of potential players and potential payers that means is like it's a fucking huge leap. And the other thing that crosses this is like, especially when you get into mobile, this is a big focal thing, but obviously it is a real thing on other platforms as well. But there's a very real equation to this where you have like your cost per install. So this is like, how much advertising dollars do we have to spend to get someone to install the game, right? And then it's like, what's the average lifetime value, right? So if we average all our players, how much money on average does one person spend in the game? And as soon as the average lifetime value is reasonably enough higher than your CPI, you basically, for some amount of time, have a money printing machine on your hands. Because what it is like, for every person we spend $2.40 to get into the game, if on average we make $3.90, well, it stands to reason that if we can pump more people into the game, that margin, that we can just continue to capitalize on that. And it's quite literally, this is actually how most big mobile games like Clash Royale, Brawl Stars, fucking whatever you want to go rattle off.
Raid Shadow Legends.
Raid Shadow Legends, for example, like that's how they continue to operate. Is it's like they've literally honed a formula of a money printing machine basically until the game loses favor over time or whatever. So I'm imagining Ubisoft saw this as like a big financial opportunity to give BMG some security and help them take it to platforms, and thought that they would both handsomely, you know, profit from it. And so I see, you know, I don't know what's happening in Brawlhalla. Y'all, I'd love y'all to echo back to me a little bit more clearly what you guys see as the problems, but I see the trajectory as this. BMG makes a game, has a bunch of fucking success. Ubisoft sees, holy shit, we could jump on that bandwagon and be a part of that, and they could make us a bunch of money, and we could potentially grow this into a multi-platform game. Potentially, you know, obviously they bought BMG, so that's a long-term play. They believe BMG can make another successful game. So let's basically, we've got a fire that's making money. Let's pour a shitload more gas on it and all make more money. And so that's where you see like they buy BMG in 2018, and then mobile comes out in 2020 or whatever. I guarantee that for those 2 years, I'd be willing to bet dollars to donuts. It was like, yeah, sustain the live game, don't fuck it up, keep it full of content, whatever. But like, I guarantee the primary focus for those 2 years probably was get the game to mobile. And I guarantee that was where an overwhelming majority of where resources went, was getting the game to mobile. And the other thing that I noticed, and like, again, I didn't flip through it deeply, was like, it feels like that Brawlhalla, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, is in like it's just in like what we call like a live ops mode. Like it's in like, we've got a game, it's successful, the base is there, keep pumping content into it. So like everything I saw for the last 2 years, at least like this thing that was the most attention grabbing, is like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle characters in the game, WWE characters in the game, just this. And that is a classic fucking pattern of like, make a successful game, put it in live ops maintenance mode. It's continuing to make money every month. Add the shit that people spend money on, and just rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat. And that's a formula where people, I mean, if they're making a bunch of money doing that, they're like, well, why would we do anything different? We're making a shitload of money, and all we're doing is putting these new characters in the game. And I don't know that that's all they're doing, but that's a lot of what I saw. And that's a classic, like, it's a live ops model, you know? So anyway, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah.
That actually hits the nail on the head, man.
Yeah.
It does, because
Yeah, definitely.
especially like, since like I've been playing the game, of course, since the end of 2015. So like around November 2015. Before any of the acquisition, before it became like, a fully launched game for any platform, what you would notice a lot all the way to up until I believe around 2018, 19ish, you could, yeah, around 2018, 19ish, there would be a lot of there's a lot more, I guess, connectivity to that from the community to the devs. Like, okay, we complain about this thing, or we have these problems, cool, it's gonna get changed like very quickly, like within a few weeks, within like maybe a couple months maximum. and then yeah, it would just be like that for years on years and years. There's a lot of focus on the gameplay, like balance changes and everything like that. And then within the past couple years, around 2020 onward, it's been a lot of these are crossovers. You know, like we have crossovers, we have battle
Cosmetic.
passes now.
Battle
We have a
pass.
bunch of we
Yeah.
have more. We have like
100%.
we have emojis now, but then like they're about to release a new like a
In the
new
emojis.
emoji skins, and I was like, it's
Yeah.
like okay, cool, but and then like again like the balancing and like the I guess the core like the what you would call like the fundamental like gameplay has kind of taken like a backseat to that. It's been sitting on the back burner, even though like the pro scene, a lot of top players have issues with how the game has been running,
Yeah.
but like we're in like a severe minority, and they've had a lot of these things have been addressed on dev streams as well. They I feel like they try to be as candid or like as transparent as possible. So like some of these questions have come up. Like there's like top like pro streamers who are like, okay, we want like a training mode in the queue, for example, or we want this and that. And then like they said frankly that that's like you guys are part of like a really small percentage of the player base. Like you're not in queue long enough for that unless you're like in Japan or like a pro player and like a ridiculous elo and things like that. So it's like
There's a lot of them.
yeah, which is I mean
Yeah, that
Yeah,
that kind of
that-
kind of turns more into like the politics of the game, right? Because like you said, you've got these pro players that are pulling thousands and thousands of tens of thousands of views, up to some of these pro players pulling millions of views on YouTube,
on YouTube, yeah.
that are quitting the game because the core function of the game isn't working right, and then they drop emoji skins, and you're like, why are you dropping emoji skins when you have this blatant issue with the game that everybody's freaking out about?
And there's a very simple answer to that question, and you're not gonna like it, but it's a very simple the very fucking simple answer is because it makes more money. Because at the end of the day, like you guys are the long-standing passionate fans of the game that feel like you've given so much, and these other pro streamers, like, because here's the thing, I'll this is straight up fact. No one in their right mind is going to do, and sometimes there's short-sightedness, so I'll offer that caveat in a minute. There is business short-sightedness, and I've seen that a lot too. But no one in their right mind is going to do things, or certainly continue to do things, that make their game less successful. So the cold hard reality is they're doing the things that make their game more financially successful. And so I'm not saying that's good or right or bad or otherwise. I don't have commentary on that, but it's just like, I think the perspective is like, yo, you're having these people quit the game. Why aren't you fixing these other things? And the cold hard answer is, you know what? Because it's more financially beneficial to put emoji skins in the game. That's it. Because if it wasn't, they would be learning and reverting, and they'd be like, oh shit, actually, this is really starting to hit our bottom line. We need to go change these things over here that these people are pissed about. Because if that was the case, if it really was hurting the game financially, and it was a better path to do that, then that's what they would be doing. Because they wouldn't be staring at it and be like, oh fuck, well, we want to do these emoji skins, but we're really losing a lot of money over here. They would totally address it. So it's like the cold hard truth of it is like, it's not a really romantic answer, but it's the game has found a ton of success, and that is where their priorities, because everything it comes down to time, money, and people. They've only got so much time, money, and people. Well, they got a shitload of money, but they've only got so much, time and people to do shit. And so everything in a studio, because I guarantee the feedback is making it into the studio. I guarantee it's sitting in a Jira backlog somewhere of fix this, do that. And what happens is, you do these big prioritization exercises where we look at like all the shit we want to put in the game, and we got to stack it up, and we got to find people and time to do it. And so it's just like emoji skins, battle passes, dude, all that stuff is competing for the same engineers got to do all that same shit. And so it's like, what are we going to task them with? And it's like, ooh, there's this big new shiny thing that could make us a bunch of money. Or there's this other thing, right? We could fix our shit that maybe is broken or whatever. But it is part of a vocal minority kind of thing for sure. But the other thing is sometimes that there is like short-sightedness in business, you know, and sometimes people do end up on the wrong side of this equation where they chase the things that they think are gonna make them successful, and sometimes they don't listen enough to their audience, and sometimes it's enough to totally F them, you know, and
Yeah.
it just there is definitely short-sightedness for sure that happens. Whether or not that will be the case here, I don't know that I totally buy that because the game has hit this wild scope of like seemingly tens of millions of
Yeah.
players.
Which is what you mentioned. Like, I'm glad you were reading off the numbers from that tweet because you said 2020 was around 7.9 million, which is double the previous year. And
Yeah,
then mobile release, and what we've heard most recently is like where it's like 50 million players. That is an astronomical like difference
Yeah.
over 2 years.
100%. I mean that's I mean that is a bona fide that's a bona fide like fucking to the moon smash hit. Like that's
Yeah.
I mean to see numbers jump like that, especially you know like games that have this much longevity and can grow with longevity like that are rare. I mean, this is a very rare story. I mean, this game, you know, releasing, you know, coming out in 2014, actually being officially released in 2017 and having, you know, yeah, what was the 2017 number? It was like 790,000, right?
Mhm.
So, and to see, you know, the game's already 3 years old at that point, and then we're talking about 2022, so 5 years later, to see one, how many games are still played 5 years later these days? Very few. How many
True.
games have grown like what is that? I don't know, potentially like 30 or 40x in its user base. Unfucking precedented. I mean, that's like, you know, you're talking about some really wild shit. And so it's like they're riding a money train right now and they are gonna fucking ride it for all it's worth. I guarantee it. And so that's why you're seeing battle passes and all that stuff because you know that may not be what you guys are used to and what you guys want, but man, the mobile audience just eats that shit up, dude. It's
Yeah.
what they're used to. It's what they get in all the other mobile games. And it's, you know, for better or worse, it's a proven monetization model. It makes a shitload of money.
And it kind of plays that hierarchy thing that you were talking about too, because these devs, again, I feel like I want to make this connection to the community. Hopefully this podcast reaches the community, that like kind of some of their like misplaced anger towards the devs, because like these devs probably do want to fix that broken game, that broken part of the
I bet
game.
they do.
But
I bet
then,
they do.
again, like you said, it's kind of like this hands tied behind their back because they're being told, like they want to fix this, broken part, but on Monday they're being told you're working on this battle pass, you're working on this cosmetic, you're doing this, you know, this is the focus, and so like
Guarantee, dude. I guarantee it, man. Like the designers, the combat designers, like shit like that, like those people, you know, a lot of people I'd be willing to bet on this team, especially because it started as a small studio and a small team that was obviously very fucking passionate about building a very specific type of game. I don't know the DNA of that studio, but I'm sure it's big time like fighting game players. It's probably fighting game makers. Like, you know, you don't just wake up one day and decide to make a fighting game. You have some deep connection to fighting games. And fighting games are very particular, very difficult type of game to make, honestly. And so I guarantee that at least the original DNA of the studio, I don't even know how many of them are still left. Who knows? I'd have to look, I'd have to, you know, dig around. But it's those people I'm sure want to be fixing this stuff and adding maybe other features or other things that kind of resonate with them creatively. But I mean, this is a classic thing of like the business case is winning here, you know, and the business case is like, dude, we can make so much more money. I'm like, dude, I'm a game designer. I've coded shit before. No one wants to sit there and fucking like pump content in the same game forever. It gets boring. It just gets it after a while. It just kind of drains you because I mean, these are creative people hungry for a creative challenge, you know. So like
Yeah.
doing the same shit and over again, pumping content in the game isn't super engaging for a lot of those folks. And I'm sure that they probably brought on new designers like to design a battle pass is wildly different than designing a combat system. So like there's probably new design blood there that like people are excited about designing a battle pass system, but that's because they're economy designers. They're, system designers from monetization standpoint. They're totally different people than the people that would have, I'm sure, maybe not, but I mean, there's not a lot of people that have the capacity to design a fighting game and design a battle pass. It's just they're two different beasts.
Yeah.
So like there's definitely new staff involved. I'm sure they're scaling the team. They have a live ops team. They're, I don't know if they're figuring out what's next for them or if they're just riding this train. Like I don't know if on the inside they're, what's the next game. I'm not really sure. I wouldn't, but yeah.
Right. That
I
What?
think
No,
that's huge. I really hope this hits the community as much as wide as possible, because I think a lot of people in the community need to hear something like this, right?
yeah, definitely. Good,
Mm.
George.
No, I'm just taking it all in. I was just gonna say this is totally enlightening for
It's
somebody on the outside for sure.
definitely is helpful. It's interesting because like I think about like a lot of the decisions they've made over the last few months, and it definitely feels like, especially because like one thing we were talking about before, it was that we were saying like the esports side of things feels like it's advertisement for the rest of like the casual experience more so than anything. Because
True, when you put it like that though, because like every time there's a crossover, new legend skins, whatever, they do have like esports players come on like the dev stream to
yeah,
do these
yep.
show matches, like they did with the Street Fighter crossovers and everything like that.
Yeah, even for the
So,
last battle pass, the not the current one, but the one before that, the Transylvania one, whatever it was called, they had all the like the content creators for the community, like all each individually like show off
oh,
one of the things that was going to be the parts of the battle
they do
pass.
that for every battle pass, or they've done it for battle passes before.
Oh, did
Is
they?
what I should say. Yeah.
Oh, there you go. So, but it's like because it was like, remember for that one, it was the two characters were literally Diana and Mordex, which are Boomy and Sansa, who were literally the faces of Brawlhalla. Were they were the main characters for the battle pass, and those two are the main faces of Brawlhalla in terms of content creation, also the competitive scene.
Yeah, especially with them definitely Sandstorm being known for Mordex, like hands
Yeah,
down, and a
yeah,
lot of
100%.
people are super aware of how Boomy is with Diana, for example.
Yeah, especially
Man,
older, like the players have been in for a while, like they
for
know.
sure.
Yeah, this isn't. Yeah, but it definitely
So
feels like the competitive scene is seen more so as like advertisement
Yeah.
for the casual
and
scene.
to like draw a parallel
For like when you were talking earlier about small companies being
acquired by bigger companies or having to blow up and get bigger teams, things operate way differently than like us as competitors were used to before.
Yeah,
It's kind of like I guess it's kind of shocking, but like I don't even really know what to say about it.
yeah,
Because it feels like people, like you said, the teams can still be passionate and everything, like from the core team, but it feels like they don't really give a fuck about the competitors, and so it's really hard to want to play the game when there's so many like things that we to be major issues, but they're not a big priority when it comes to a
the
player base of 50
hierarchy.
million people.
Yeah,
So
Well, yeah,
yeah,
I mean, the cold hard reality is like I mean, I'm not even saying whether it's good or bad because business is complicated, but like
mm,
I mean, you guys as an audience, like generalizing you guys as like the competitive audience of the game, like are being deprioritized. Like that's just the cold hard truth of it. There's no two ways to slice it, right? It's just
yeah,
like it's like a different segment of the audience of the game is being prioritized over you guys, and here's the thing, like that certainly that almost certainly will eat away at the competitive audience over some amount of time. And who knows if it will be fast? Who knows if it will be slow? But I mean, people will get fed up eventually and they'll quit. And it's just like will the competitive game be sustained at the same level? Like
yeah,
if they see it start to dwindle, like will it end up mattering then to them? Like I can't really say, but I mean the cold hard truth is like the devs may want to do what they want to do, but at the end of the day, like what you guys have seen is a very obvious shift in priorities, right?
Yeah.
The priorities of the team have changed. That doesn't mean the team, the people on the boots on the ground have changed the priorities, but whoever is delivering their priorities, whether it's the people at the top of BMG and they're like, we got this money train and we're going to ride this shit straight to the promised land, or whether it's a little bit of that and Ubisoft being like, yo, this is what you guys need to be doing. This is the right financial move, because at the end of the day, they are 100% owned, by Ubisoft. And I don't know what arrangement they have. There's different contracts that codify different levels of independence and autonomy across these relationships. I have no earthly idea what their arrangement is, but whoever is steering the ship at the end of the day has decided that free-to-play monetization mechanics and capitalizing in that way is the most important thing. And so that's where the resources are getting spent.
Yeah.
You can't
It is
even really be mad about it.
Yeah,
I mean,
not mad at it for sure, but it's
it
just
hurts,
but
but
you
you can't be mad.
unfortunate.
And sometimes people will leave. I mean, I've actually seen this kind of in a little bit in different ways. Like, people will leave teams over this for sure. I'm
Yeah.
sure that there's probably already been devs that had departed. There's probably devs that may be departing. The other thing is too, almost all these deals come with golden handcuffs for the specific like key people involved. So if they were bought in 2018, their golden handcuffs are probably gone by now. Usually the standard is like 3 years. Like the key people stay, but it depends. Like, they were such a small studio. Did a lot of people have golden handcuffs? Did they get locked into a contract, to stay for 3 years, and then that's when their payout is fully realized. And so, but I mean, yeah, I mean, it's the kind of thing, like, people get bored, and if they're really passionate about this, like, people will leave the team, or maybe they're looking forward to their next game. I don't really know, but it definitely, everything you guys are saying, like, it definitely lines up with like classic shit that I've seen many times.
Definitely.
And do we have anything else to cover at the end, or are we?
No, I think this has been absolutely huge. I think you've been a huge insight. Your knowledge base has been above and beyond what we could ever ask for.
Definitely. For sure. So much appreciated, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Neil, very much for coming on, giving us your time, man.
Oh, no worries. You see a lot of shit. You see a lot of shit when you work inside of a game studio. So there's a lot of war stories. There's a lot of war stories to trade. So I'm more than happy to share.
Thank you once again, and thank you for everybody for tuning in to Meraki's Game States episode 4. Hope you enjoyed. Be sure to catch the uploaded version on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, noon on Friday, Eastern time. So with that, thank you all again. Hope you have a great night.
Have a good night. Peace.
Peace.
Thanks, y'all.